Tonight's program features a presentation by Rabbi Jonah Pezzner, Director of the Religious Action Center for Reform Judaism, and response from a panel including Daoud Aboudiab, President of the Faith and Cultural Center, Our Muslim Neighbor, Ralph Schultz, President and CEO of the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce, and Dean Emily Towns from Vanderbilt Divinity School. We're also pleased tonight to have with us Lionel Matthews, former Metro Councilman and representing the Mayor's Office of Neighborhoods and Community Engagement. Lionel, stand. And before we begin, you can do that most important ritual, which is to reach into your pocket, pull out your cell phone, and put it on mute or turn it off, so you don't have those holy bells ringing. And also, at the place where you're sitting, you'll see where the cup holder is, a card. During the evening, if you are so moved, please write a question out, and at various times during the evening, members of our organizing committee will go through the auditorium, raise your hand, and give your question to them, and then we will ask those questions later on during that portion of the program. So needless to say, 2015 has been a momentous year, and 2016 promises more challenges. Conflict in Syria has resulted in one of the more extraordinary migrations of modern times. Syria remains a shambles, while ISIL continues to challenge countries in the Middle East and in the West. Anti-immigrant refugee fervor remains a concern in our country as the presidential election process enters actual primaries beginning next week, culminating in political conventions and our November elections. In Tennessee, controversy has been brewing over the teaching of religions in middle school history classes, with specific criticism focused on Islam. Since 2012, the family of Abraham has attempted to address divisive words and deeds in the greater Nashville community by presenting speakers and perspectives that give us pause to learn about the diversity of our human family and the value of being welcoming and embracing. Our programs have featured Muslim, Jewish, and Christian clergy and speakers, business and civic leaders who each in their own way have been working towards developing a common understanding of one another in Nashville or in the communities from which they have come. In that spirit, we're honored tonight to have with us as our featured speaker, Rabbi Jonah Pezzner, whom I'll introduce in a moment. And again, as a reminder, if you have any questions, please fill them out, raise your hands, and our organizing committee will pick them up. Rabbi Pezzner is the director of the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism. The Religious Action Center is affiliated with the Reform Jewish movement. It advocates on a broad range of social justice issues. Rabbi Pezzner was named one of the most influential rabbis in America by Newsweek magazine. He has been an inspirational leader, creative entrepreneur, and a tireless advocate for social justice. Please join me in welcoming Rabbi Jonah Pezzner to Nashville.
Good evening. Good evening. Can you hear me? Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Ze hayom asa Adonai nagila v'nisimcha bo. This is a day that God has given us. Let us rejoice. From the Psalms. Now, any day is a day when we would wake up and praise God for the gift of life and the gift of fellowship and friendship. But on this day of all days, when my cousin, the imam, has to say it's worth celebrating that there is a rabbi speaking at the mosque, let's be extra grateful, because today is a day that God has given us. But would that we wouldn't have to celebrate that it's such a news story, such an occurrence, such a Twitter moment, such a Facebook post, that the rabbi is speaking at the mosque, that the imam would speak at the temple, that the minister would come to the mosque, and the priest would go to the temple. This is America, and it's as it should be. To the family of Abraham, who has convened and organized not just this moment, but has built a Nashville in a Tennessee that all of America should be proud of. Muslims and Christians and Jews and all people coming together. That's what we stand for as a society. So thank you to the family of Abraham and to our hosts at the Islamic Center of Tennessee and to our sister mosques. 5 mosques represented here from across this community. God bless. Thank you for having us. This is truly one of the great honors of my rabbinate. I have been doing interfaith social justice work for my entire life and career. I've given speeches all over the world. I have never been given the honor of speaking in a mosque. So you'll forgive me if I'm a little nervous. All right, so can I get a lot of support? Can I get an amen? Okay. The Baptist rabbi, here it comes. So I want to think with you first with a little bit of reflection about our father Abraham. Because here we are convened by the family of Abraham. And many of you may know this, but for some of you it may be new. And I'm going to share with you a little bit of an interpretation about Abraham, our father, but from a Jewish perspective. Now, I know if you grew up with Islam, you understood Abraham because you read him in the Quran. And so the story's a little bit different. But the story's in there, right, Imam?
Yes.
Yeah, oh, it's in there. And if you grew up reading the Christian scripture, also the story is told a little bit differently. So I'm a rabbi, I'm a Jew. I'm going to speak from a Jewish perspective. And I'm going to invite my cousins, the imams, and my brothers, and my cousins, the ministers and priests, to help out and tell the story from your perspective. But this is at least from my perspective. So there's this great moment in what the Jews call the Torah, the first 5 books, where God says to Abraham, take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and bring him up to the mountain and offer him to me there. You know the story? Okay, sound familiar? To the Jews, it sounds familiar, right? To my Muslim brothers and sisters, does it sound familiar? There's a couple of details that are different. Who gets taken up to the mountain in the Quran? It's Ishmael! Funny how, depending on your own history, you tell it a little bit different, right? In the Muslim tradition, they tell a very similar story, but of course they place the father of Islam at the center of the story. It's Ishmael who is brought up the mountain. Now, I'm not going to tell the story anymore from the Muslim perspective because I'm not an expert, but I'm just at least lifting up. There's an entirely different narrative to the story, which is also beautiful and powerful and seeking to teach and inspire. But here's what's really interesting. There was a wonderful medieval rabbinic commentator named Rashi, who came of age during the Golden Era, when Islam and Judaism were in deep conversation in the Middle Ages, when Jews and Muslims had bigger problems than fighting each other. No offense to my Christian brothers and sisters. But they were getting along very, very well. And Rashi, this wonderful commentator, not working so much? Okay, I'm being videotaped as well. I'm being wired for sound. That work? Okay, now everybody's going to hear me all over Tennessee. All right, thank you, Imam. Thank you. So Rashi, this incredible commentator, who is a rabbi and a Jew, but knows Islam, he creates his own version of the story, quoting classic rabbinic legend, the Midrash. Everybody say Midrash. Midrash are the stories the rabbis told to teach something off of the biblical text. And here is the story as Rashi tells it. God says to Abraham, take your son. And Abraham says to God, well, I have 2 sons, Ishmael and Isaac. And God says, well, take the one that's an only child. And Abraham says, each one is an only child to his mother. Wow. Do you see what Abraham's doing? Do you see what Rashi is doing through Abraham? Who was Ishmael's mother? Hagar. Who was Isaac's mother? Sarah. So Abraham is arguing back to God, saying, wait a second. To each mother, this is the only child, the beloved child. And so according to the Midrash, Abraham hears from God once again, well, take the one that you love. And Abraham says, I love both my sons. And only then, according to this legend, God says, take Isaac. So what is Rashi trying to teach us? I have two sons, says Abraham. They're each the beloved only child to the mother. I love them both. Rashi is trying to teach us, O children of Abraham, family of Abraham, that Ishmael and Isaac were not cousins. We're brothers. We're sisters. We're the beloved children of our parents. We are the beloved creation of the one God. And we really are the family of Abraham. But poor Sarah and poor Hagar. Think about these two incredible women who are pitted against one another in the biblical text. Hagar, who gets cast out into the wilderness, who is to see her own child die and have God intervene and say, no, don't worry. I will make him a great nation as well. And Sarah, who thinks that the promise will never be fulfilled because she is not able to have a child until she miraculously has Isaac. This family puts the fun back in dysfunction. But I tell you that story as a way to frame our conversation tonight, because rightly we call this community the family of Abraham. But there is struggle. There is pain. God does not give it to us on a platter. God makes Isaac and Ishmael and Sarah and Hagar fight for it. It is on us to reclaim, to bring back the unity, the belief in the one God, that God, according to Rashi, has even forgotten about. It's Abraham who reminds God of the unity of humanity and the unity of this family. So let's guide our conversation tonight with the charge of Abraham, remembering that to be a family is to be united even when we might be denied our unity, even when we might be divided. To be the voices of Abraham, to say, each one is the beloved of his mother. All of us in this room that are raising children, if you have a child, raise your hand. Put yourself in the position of either Hagar or Sarah. The one thing you want in your life, you don't have kids yet, but you're beautiful. You are a beautiful creature of God. And you're a reminder to us of what we want for our children. To grow, to thrive, to know love, to know God, and to be free. Each one is the beloved of his mother. Each one of our children is our beloved. It is our job to reunite the family of Abraham so that we can be one family created in God's image. So we have a lot of work to do. And in framing the work that we have to do, I want to share my own experience with the Muslim community that I got to know and love over the last 15 years, back where I have been living, which is Boston, Massachusetts. There is a wonderful sister mosque to this mosque there called the Islamic Society of Boston. Great community, very active part of the interfaith world. We have an organization in Boston of about 50 churches and synagogues and one mosque, the ISB. And together we have created enormous change. It was the interfaith community of Boston and Massachusetts that put enough pressure on the state legislature to work with a governor named Romney to pass what we called Romney Care, which became the paradigm for Obamacare. And it was passed by Republicans and Democrats. It was supported by labor and by business. It was supported by insurers and providers. And the reason that happened was because Muslims, Christians, and Jews fought together in one voice, raising up political discourse to a sacred place, speaking with one voice to Democrats and Republicans, to labor and to business, saying, we here in the United States of America, our values rise up above the narrow partisan self-interest of one group or another. We see a shared set of values in which every soul is created in God's image and therefore is worthy of quality, affordable health care. And together, the Muslim community, the Jewish community, the Christian community built hundreds of millions of dollars of affordable housing, working with the state, transformed public schools, and created deep love and affection. So we were shocked when an anti-Muslim hate group started an internet-based campaign to link radical elements that are not Muslim, but are often called radical Islam, which is a misnomer, and attach it to the Islamic Society of Boston. And they did it by kind of creating this crazy web of connections, linking names of people who had some relationship to somebody who had once written something about Hamas or terror or another, and showing how this mosque was in somehow a hotbed of terrorism and radical thought. And it got so bad that there was a candidate who was running for governor who got up using the talking points from this anti-Muslim hate group and called out the mosque and said, we got to worry about what's happening with these radical Islamists in that mosque. The very next day, the rabbis, the priests, and the ministers held a news conference on the steps of the Islamic Society of Boston, and we demanded that that candidate for governor stand with us the next day and apologize. Well, don't clap yet. You don't know what he did. You don't know how the story ends. Well, it gets really good. Here's what happened. Number one, he came the next day. He apologized at the mosque in front of all the press, and he lost. And the anti-Muslim hate group turned its camera lens on the rabbi who was standing next to the imam at the press conference, and started an internet attack campaign against this rabbi. How this rabbi was complicit with Islamic terror. Now the Muslim hate group was a Jewish hate group. Or I should say the anti-Muslim hate group was an anti-Jewish hate group. And I looked at that picture that was getting bounced around the internet. And I spoke to this rabbi who was getting hate mail from all over the world because of this amazing what 3 people in an internet click can do. All over the world he was getting hate mail. And I saw his picture and I thought it could have been me. It could have been Rabbi Shifton. It could have been Rabbi Shana. It could have been any rabbi. So we organized 87 rabbis, Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, Reconstructionist, together to take a full-page ad out in the Jewish paper and call out this hate group that first was targeting Muslims and then was targeting Jews. My friends, if we're going to be the family of Abraham, we together have to call out Islamophobia. We have to beat back the forces of bigotry, whether it's anti-Jewish bigotry, anti-Muslim bigotry, or bigotry in any form in America. And so when the President of the United States convenes the faith community and launches the I Know My Neighbor campaign, how many of you know about this campaign? You must know about this campaign. Go online and sign the pledge. It is the Know Your Neighbor campaign. It's a commitment not only to be a voice for religious pluralism in America and to challenge and beat back Islamophobia, but a commitment to go and meet your Muslim neighbors. Now, I don't know if you've been paying attention. We have a candidate for president. I'm not going to name names, but who said some things that are, bigoted. Like the idea that all people coming from Mexico are rapists and drug dealers. Right? So here's the good news. He's not singling out Muslims. But would ban all entry of Muslims to America. I think you've heard of this, right? If we don't speak out forcefully and powerfully and say we are our neighbor's keepers, then who will? Because we are the family of Abraham. And just as Abraham spoke out to God and said, I love both my sons, we need to speak truth to power and say we love all our children. And so we stand shoulder to shoulder. How many of you know about the wonderful coalition in Washington, Shoulder to Shoulder? It's a coalition of the Islamic Society of North America, the Union for Reform Judaism, and a whole array of other faith groups that stand together and are committed to beat back Islamophobia whenever and wherever we see it. I want to share, you can clap at that. You can absolutely clap at that. I want to share one more story, and with this I'll come to a bit of a close and open it up for a conversation with our panel. You might be asking yourself right about now, why? Why is this rabbi here? Why does he care? Why does his organization, the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism, take this so seriously? My organization, which sits in the heart of the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., sits in a building that was donated by a guy you've never heard of named Kivi Kaplan. Everybody say Kivi. Everybody say Kaplan. It's a great, how many of you, anybody? No, right? Kivi, you know Kivi Kaplan? So Kivi Kaplan was a Jewish fellow from the Northeast who married a wonderful, nice Jewish girl from the Northeast, and they went on their honeymoon to Florida. This was back in like the early 50s. And he and his wife take a taxi to a country club to go out for dinner or whatever. And Mr. Kaplan arrives at the country club and sees a sign, "No Jews, no dogs." And Mr. Kaplan turns to the black taxi driver and said, "Is this common down here?" And the black taxi driver says, "They don't even bother with us." Kivi then donated the building to our Reform Jewish movement and said, we must be at the center of civil rights in America. Because no Jews, no dogs, no blacks, no Muslims, no women, no Latinos, it doesn't matter. We stand together or we fall alone. It happens that that wonderful building that he donated, because the Reformed Jewish movement made such a commitment to be part of the civil rights movement, we hosted the Leadership Conference for Civil Rights, Dr. King's coalition. And it was for that reason that because we hosted Dr. King and the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was drafted in our conference room. The most important civil rights legislation in the history of American culture was drafted in the offices of the Reformed Jewish movement. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was drafted in our conference room. And so as we marched with Dr. King in Selma, we march with the Islamic Center of Tennessee and all of the Muslim community of Tennessee and all of the Muslim community of America as we march against Islamophobia, bigotry, and hate. And so one last thing before I close. We have to think more broadly than just about beating back Islamophobia. Because 1 out of 3 black men in America will go to jail. 1 out of 3 black men in America will go to jail unless we break open the broken criminal justice system in this country and we deal with the racism that is rampant in our cities. If you look at Ferguson and you look at Cleveland and you look at Detroit and you look at New York and maybe even Nashville, we know that though Abraham loves all his children equally, they are not all treated equally. The Voting Rights Act, which we're so proud of, was decimated by a Supreme Court case in 2012. Now we see all over the South voter suppression laws that are being passed that are disproportionately disenfranchising communities of color. Our rights to vote are under siege. Our right to live freely as a minority community in America is under siege. Communities of color are under siege. The gap between the rich and the poor in our country is the worst in any of our lifetimes. So this isn't just about standing up to a presidential candidate when he speaks like a bigot. This is about taking back American society and lifting it up to that higher moral plane. That when we think about what Jesus taught, when we think about what Muhammad preached, when we think about what Moses charged the Israelites, it was to live in that higher place The place that is not Egypt, but the place that is the world that is transformed. The world that now is parched with injustice. But the world that we know, Muslim and Christian and Jew, can transform into the world as it should be. A world overflowing with the waters of justice. A world in which we all do justice and love mercy and walk humbly with God. And a world in which God knows we love all our children equally. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Pezzner. So now is your opportunity. If you have any questions, start writing them on the cards. And when you finish writing your questions, please raise your hand, and members of our organizing committee will pick up your questions. So now we want to have some comment from our panel. We're going to start off with Daoud Al-Boudia, who is the president of the Faith and Cultural Center, our Muslim neighbor.
Yeah, thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Okay. Somebody wave at me if I drop this too low, please. Thank you, Arwen, for the no introduction. And thank you, Rabbi Pezzner, for your impassioned words that you shared with us. I'm honored to join you and such a distinguished panel. As some of you know, I wear a couple of hats. In addition to Faith and Culture Center, our Muslim neighbor, I'm president of the Islamic Center of Colombia, a very small center, but much larger story. I'm a member of the organizing committee of Family of Abraham and president of the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition, and I'm also a full-time healthcare administrator. I have a beautiful family, wife and 3 children. And these organizations, including the family, contribute in important ways towards community building. And this is what I found myself recently to be all about, community building. I mention these organizations because while we each must provide for our families and lead professional lives, the experience our family members, our children, our spouses, our parents encounter in the community are important. And that's why I'm involved in community building. Many years ago, when the Islamic Center was firebombed, diverse people from all around came to Columbia, Tennessee. And what they did was magical. They redefined for me what community means. It was no longer my immediate Muslim community. It wasn't the burn and joint clinic I was managing. It became the people who shared concern for my well-being, for my community that existed as a sub-community. More recently, then my youngest was 1 year old. More recently, my 9-year-old asked his mother if we have to move. He had overheard a report on Trump. So here I mentioned his name. I gave it away. But you know, since that time, we've explained to my son what's happened. But since that time, I have listened and played and reposted repeatedly our community's statement of solidarity with the Muslim community that was organized. Yeah, we can get we can get a little choked up about this. But that's what I keep playing. You know, Rabbi Shifton and the imams and the community leaders who came out, and Avi, many others who came out to say we stand with the Muslim community. And that singling out Muslims or any other group is un-American. This is one way that we express community, and I'm grateful for all of those who showed up, not just to support the Muslim community, but those who stand with and by the refugees, the homeless, and against the shooting at West End Synagogue, and the intimidation of teachers in our schools, and at times the pastors in our own churches. In Islamic tradition, we are called to ponder as a form of worship, and the topic tonight gives us much to ponder upon. Admittedly, the mere mention of relationship can send any number of people in opposing directions. Creating intentional and meaningful relationships is crucial to building and living in community with those who are like us and those who are different from us. I find that it is in these relationships that we learn about ourselves. Ultimately, we may begin to care for and about one another, specifically those with whom we have no community. The desired outcome is that we begin to matter to one another in a personal way. You stop being a member of an unidentifiable, you stop being a number or an unidentifiable member of some community that is distant from me. You're no longer a Jew, you are Jonah Pezzner. My approach to creating intentional relationships, in my experience, does not begin with a conversation about politics, faith, or life positions. Rather, I find we start by getting to know the person first. We learn about how we each live out our faith and our beliefs. One can pick up a book about Hindus, but you are by far better off at a relationship building by getting to know a Hindu first. It is more likely that in a relationship that will grow, that we accept the person first, so that later on we may place a point of disagreement in its right place and in context. It is what we do as families, and it is how we remain families. Those who know Muslims are not afraid of Muslims. It is those who don't know Muslims who fear Muslims. I am reminded by the many times my now friends reached out to me and family members and invited us to their home or their group. I felt acceptance. I was delighted that someone had genuine interest in us and our ideas. I did not feel judged. And I also did not feel I had to lay out my beliefs and positions on this topic or that controversy before we could enjoy a glass of iced tea. We did not have to settle the Israeli-Palestinian conflict first so we could have a conversation. In fact, what I find most precious are the little successes we witness each other take towards a more loving and kinder view of our world. One that we begin to take little steps towards making that view a reality. I not only accept, but I get that Allah will that we are of different tribes and faiths, and that it is His will that He challenge us each in what He has revealed or continues to reveal to us. We must each walk in truth and be faithful to what we each hold dear. We must honor one another and thus honor God in how we individually relate to everyone else. Those from our own tribe and those who wear a darker or lighter shade of skin, sport an accent or a different culture, undocumented, or refugee. We must live out that each life matters before we can say all lives matter. We must live out that fight against racism and discrimination in all forms before or as we fight against that which directly affects us. As a community, we cannot oppress the few while we are attempting to liberate others. As Faith and Culture Center, our Muslim Neighbor Initiative, we are countering anti-Muslim sentiment through education by holding monthly forums and annual conferences on relevant topics. In addition, we focus on providing venues for Muslims and non-Muslims to learn about one another directly from each other. Each person at the table brings all their identities with them, and no subject or concern is off limits. We talk about our faith and beliefs on social justice issues, racism, Islamophobia, and everything else through our own personal experiences. People are asked to come with an open mind, respecting each other and our own differences. It is essential, uncompromising, truthful conversation. Our Muslim Neighbor Initiative convened over 25 of these to date, and we have few partners who are conducting their own. FCC takes care of all the arrangements and all the costs thanks to our funders, two of whom are here tonight with us. Our model is based in collective impact. The key word is collective, and so we're very proud of our partners, the Islamic Centers, Metro Human Relations Commission, the Tennessee Human Rights Commission, Family of Abraham, Humanities Tennessee, our partners at Vanderbilt, AMAC, American Muslim Advisory Council, American Center for Outreach, the Muslim Women Council, Tennessee Immigrant Refugee Rights Coalition, and others. We also would love to partner with the Chamber and the business community. There's a plug. Dialogue without engagement is unfulfilling. We often hear that criticism of interfaith dialogue. We invite you tonight to partake in however way you can. Brooke Baker and Hayat are sitting right there, and they have brochures about our initiative and the ways that you can participate. If you have interest, please do stop them and ask them for a brochure. Community is about us, and that includes you. Thank you.
Our next panelist is Ralph Schultz. Ralph is the president and CEO of the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce. He wanted to sit in one of the good seats so he could hear our speech.
And let me just say that I would have thought you'd save the least interesting speaker for the last. This is a tough group to follow. First of all, I want to say to the Imam, thank you for the opportunity to be here. This is also my first mosque. Not the first I've attended, but the first I've spoken in. And Rabbi, thank you for your comments as well. Really, I have little to say except to say that for people of this community, the fulfillment in their lifetime is dependent on the diversity that we create in this community. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is something that every human being is entitled to. And to the extent that every individual in the community can pursue that life, liberty, and that pursuit of happiness, we as a community prosper. The Chamber is an organization that encourages prosperity. But prosperity for us means each individual has the opportunity to have the fuel to pursue how they want to fulfill their lives. And so prosperity for us isn't just a materialistic pursuit. It's about creating a community in which everyone in the community can pursue the happiness that they deserve. Now I'm going to move a little bit into the economic development sphere here for a second and say to you that it is demonstrated right now that the marketplace and the economy is a global marketplace. The regions of the world that will prosper are the regions of the world that embrace diversity. As you look at the rising generation, particularly of millennials, often spoken about, you see a generation that is rising that is diverse in and of itself. It pursues diversity across the world. It pursues diversity as a lifestyle that it embraces. Now here's what Nashville has going for it. Nashville, for 150 years, has been a place that welcomed diversity. It has been a place that is known for its friendliness. You've seen the polls, you've seen the studies, you've seen the acknowledgement. In fact, just today again, Forbes magazine listed Nashville as one of the top 10 places in the world to visit, particularly because it is a friendly community that embraces diversity. If we are to prosper and therefore have the fuel for the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we're going to have to continue to embrace that diversity. We're going to have to continue to embrace the value that comes from the differences in people being together as compared to some sort of homogeneous and amorphous culture. So, let me just make these comments and then we'll respond to the questions later. If Nashville is to continue to be a prosperous community, it needs to be a community that values each individual and the differences in each individual. The community will prosper because of those differences, both on a regional basis and on a global basis. When we benefit from that difference, we as a community will prosper, and all of us will have the opportunity to live that fulfilling life. So, the chamber, the business community that is with us encourages the prosperity. We encourage the embrace of refugees to this area. We encourage immigration to this area because we know that this area will prosper more significantly if those differences are embraced in Nashville. So thank you. I'll be happy to answer questions later.
I do.
And finally, Dean Emily Towns from Vanderbilt Divinity School is here to join us, and on the panel she is the sole clergy person. So I don't know if that's where that leaves us here, but.
Leaves you with a bath. Thank you, Rabbi Pezzner. There is a cap that Donald Trump wears and a lot of his supporters. You've seen it, it's red. Do you remember what's on it?
Don't.
Make America great again. I look at that cap, and I look at the supporters wearing that cap, and chills go through me. It's not the Make America Great. I'm used to us going way overboard on America being a wonderful place. It's the again that concerns me so much. Because what is caught up in that again is we don't want the gains we've seen in any element of the civil rights movement in place. We want to roll those back. We want to send women into places that resemble more servitude than partnership. We want to see youth and young adults being relegated to areas of they don't know what they're talking about, they need to sit down, they need to shut up. Everything that says diversity is being rolled back in that one little word again. Now, what concerns me about that is that so many of us don't know our histories. We don't know our histories as ethnic groups. We don't know our histories sometimes in our own religious communities. And we take fast food versions of what that's about and who that is about as gospel, as holy. And there is a phrase that the historian James Melvin Washington coined. You cannot remember what you never knew. You cannot remember what you never knew. Now, wrapped up in that is a sense of how can we make something again what we never knew what it really was for those various groups. What we end up with, I think, is we fail to see the importance of how we as faith communities must educate ourselves about other faith communities and not accept stereotypes, not accept bigotry, not accept hatred as examples of what that faith community is all about. I get questions every once in a while. Well, what do you think about hate groups? And the hate groups take all sorts of tones and tenors. More recently, folks have been much more obvious. Well, what do you think about Islamic hate groups? And I always pause because it is almost as if we don't have religious extremism in all of our faith traditions. We do. It's hard to admit, it's not easy to recognize always, but they don't represent the majority of where we all live and what we believe. Which I think is most of us in here, I hope all of us in here, are about peace and harmony and love and justice. And living and building a world in that vein. Why are we not talked to? Why are we not pointed to? Why is it that so much of media likes to point to the extreme rather than the rule? I think some of that is it makes better ratings. But I also think some of that is fear. Fear of a loss of control, fear of what it means that we really are living into our diversities, fear of that which we don't know. And we don't want to educate ourselves because that's going to take some work. That's going to be difficult. But I think it's our very job as faith communities to do that hard work. When our culture is telling us to hate, we have to teach love. We have to teach love to those in our own communities, and we have to practice love to those in other communities. Keeping folks ignorant of other religious traditions is oppression. When I see calls not to teach a religious tradition in our public schools, that's oppression. And the reason why it's so dangerous is that we grow up yet another generation of folks who know absolutely nothing about Islam. And so when they know nothing, when somebody tells them something, they think that something is true. Usually it's not. We've seen that happen. After the attacks in 9/11. I heard versions of what Islam was about I have never seen anywhere except in somebody's warped imagination. When the warped imagination takes over as reality, we're in trouble. So keeping folks ignorant of other traditions is oppression, and it's a power move. It's a power move to make sure we don't talk to each other, that we don't build those networks we're trying so hard to build across religious traditions. And I simply want to end by saying, if we're going to make America great, let's remake America into an image of a diverse, loving, caring, accepting, and believing nation that we believe we can live together, rather than demonize those who don't look like us, talk like us, think like us.
Thank you, Dean Towns. So now we have a couple of questions. And if you have any more, please write them out on your cards and raise your hands, and it will be picked up. I guess the first question, and we'll start, and we'll ask Rabbi Pezzner to respond, and anybody else along the panel can pipe in after that. What suggestions and specific best practices can you suggest to break down our silos, link hands, and do social justice?
First of all, I want to celebrate my co-panelists here. Thank you for your wonderful words as well. Can we have a round of applause? And to have the Chamber of Commerce. Can I get an amen on the Chamber of Commerce? I also, we all have our trials. Abraham went through his trial with his beloved sons. I'm going through a trial right now, which is I've got about 10 minutes left on this voice, and God is going to take it away from me. So I'm struggling to get to, once I lose vocal capacity, I'm just going to duck all the questions to Ode, okay? But I think actually the key to doing this work is in what David said, which is investing in the relationships. So I want to do something radical. I'm going to stop talking at you. I want to ask you to turn to somebody near you who you did not come with, and just in 2 to 3 minutes, tell that person why you came tonight and what's happening for you right now. What you're learning, what's stirring you, what's agitating you, or what you're feeling excited about. But take 2 to 3 minutes, turn to somebody in your row who you did not come with, and have a quick conversation so you can be in relationship with one another. In the conversation you were just having, hopefully God lives in the details. By the way, how many of you are involved in the organization called Noah? Just raise your hand. So you all know what I'm talking about. Because that's the practice, the habit of Noah's Nashville organizing, action, and hope, right? So it's the idea that we can actually move from all the conversation into action, but we start with these sacred conversations. I just want to, should I give it over to the panelists to respond?
Anybody have a response? Okay, next question goes to Ralph Schultz. If Nashville embraces diversity and the Chamber of Commerce promotes prosperity, what can you tell us about the plight of our African American neighbors in Nashville?
Repeat that question again. I just want to hear the first part again.
If Nashville embraces diversity and the Chamber of Commerce promotes prosperity, what can you tell us about the plight of our African American?
I think from our perspective, we promote prosperity, and we see the foundation of prosperity being education. We see the foundation of prosperity being the relationships in the community. We see the foundation of prosperity being in collaboration and intentional action to prepare people to be able to pursue, to be self-sufficient, but to pursue successfully prosperity. So So we support public policy, we support business investment that makes itself available to anyone in the community. One of the things that we were talking about here just a moment ago, Nashville's been blessed with good mayors over the past 25 years that have encouraged that kind of environment. Nashville is blessed with community leaders of all types that encourage the kind of collaboration and the kind of connection and relationships that want to provide equal opportunity to everyone in the community. Where we fall down as a community a lot of times, and one of the reasons that we advocate so much for education, is that while equal opportunity may exist, equal preparation to exploit that opportunity doesn't necessarily exist. So when you look at the Chamber's agenda right now, you'll see an agenda that has education number one on the list because that's the foundation of being able to pursue opportunity. You'll see transit high on the list because without mobility, you can't get to a prosperous place and people can't find you. You will find affordable housing on the list because without the opportunity to afford the housing, you're not going to be able to take advantage of the assets that exist in this area. So we don't look at it strictly from the perspective of any one group in the community. We look at it from the perspective of all people that live in this community and how do we help each of those individuals to achieve prosperity. So that's why we interact with and we have relationship with a variety of groups. So I'll just sum that all up by saying that we believe that the community has an obligation to all of its members to provide equal opportunity, strong education, and support of expanding opportunity that includes exposing everyone in the community to those opportunities that can be exploited from an economic perspective. But I would say to you, Erwin, I would say to whoever asked the question, that it's really about all groups in the community. We embrace all those groups, and whether it's African American, whether it's Muslim, whoever it might be, we want to open opportunity for everyone.
So I'm going to try to do what I can to try to save Rabbi Pezzner's voice. He will be here after we finish up, and you can approach him individually. So I'm going to ask Dean Towns to respond to this question: is how do you teach against again at the Divinity School?
I'm going to start from my own tradition of Christianity and use an image that many of you may know across the traditions in here. You call a demon a demon. And by that I mean that what we try to do is help our students understand from the various areas that we have in our curriculum, be it history or ethics or theology, pastoral care, preaching, church administration, whatever, that our job is to open up spaces for people to thrive. I'm an ethicist by training. The technical term for what I do is Christian social ethics. I use a framework called womanism to do that, which means I start with the experiences of black women and try to understand what that can teach us in a broader framework. In my ethics classes, I want students to understand how to understand. That's teaching against the again. Because part of what is happening is that our students by and large come very excited, very engaged, on fire, with passion, And most of the time, we're spending time trying to get them to focus and direct themselves. It's a natural, normal thing in a seminary to have that. But what they often don't have when they come is a way to ask the questions about what's going on in the world. They know the world is not what they want it to be. They can see the kinds of ways that we oppress one another, hate one another, don't understand each other. They get it in their family system. Sometimes they have to eradicate it within themselves. And so what we try to do is give them space to look at that in a supportive environment. It's the in a no judgment zone that is filled with judgment. If you can imagine that sort of irony. And what I mean by that is the writer James Baldwin. How many of you know James Baldwin? James Baldwin grew up in the Pentecostal tradition. He rejected it, but it never left him. You know, it's one of those things you think you can walk away, but you turn around and there you are. What Baldwin once wrote about is doing your first works over. And what that meant from his tradition is that from time to time you take a look at where you have gone in your journey of life. You make an inventory. You tell the truth about it. You don't brag about it. You tell the truth about it. And you make some decisions about what are the next steps. Where are you to go? How are you to be? That's doing your first works over. And what we try to help students to do is to cultivate doing their first works over as a practice throughout their lives. So that the again is always questioned. And there's always an awareness that you and I move out of positions of power with one another all the time. No one can get satisfied with where they are in life, because there's always more to know, always more to grow, always more to be aware of. And so we try to develop a curriculum that helps students get at that. On our best days, we are brilliant. On our worst days, we got a whole lot more work to do.
Okay, have one more question to go to Daoud, again saving Rabbi Pezzner's voice and giving our panelists an opportunity to speak. Daoud spoke very well about the program of Our Muslim Neighbor and the Seat at the Table. I was wondering if you could perhaps give us a couple of vignettes of some of the conversations that you participated in and observed of the 25 that you said you had already focused on. I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but I think it'd be worthwhile to do that.
Yeah, you are putting me on the spot. Thank you. You know, I've participated not in all 25, in a few of those, and I've facilitated. And I have to say that in many interactions, I was surprised to find out that some of the people that I knew, to them I was the first or the second Muslim they've ever interacted with. That is the first revelation. And as that happened, I realized that, you know, the sentiments are not based in necessarily knowledge. The fear is not based in knowledge. The sentiment is really in not knowing. And so as we get to know one another, I think we come with those perceptions we have. And one particular conversation, you know, we had talked about the gender issues, and we talked about relationships, and we talked about lifestyles. And it was interesting, at one point, one of the individuals who grew up in Africa, Christian, and is now agnostic, stopped the conversation and said, you know what, I can't accept this. I can't accept that you will not accept my friends, that you are condemning them. And I thought for a second, and I wouldn't appreciate that either. And there was a comment made that, as Muslims, and that was the conversation. We believe in sin, and we believe in doing right. But on any given day, what I shared was that I may have a cocktail of a couple of sins myself. And so my opinion of what is and what is not sin didn't condemn me. And it doesn't necessarily condemn the other. I think we find out that it is a challenge in those conversations to be who you are and leave being who you are just with a greater understanding of the other. You don't have to compromise your beliefs. I think what you find out is that you start processing your own knowledge of your own faith a little bit differently, with a little bit more compassion. We start every prayer with invoking the all-compassionate attribute of God. And there was a man who has visited and counseled Muslims in jail. And he said, for the love of God, could you explain to me why Muslims do not believe in mercy? None of us Muslims could explain that because we all believe in mercy. My wife is sitting up there, and she has been wearing a scarf for quite a while. And she has worked at one of the hospitals for a number of years. And after 7 years, a co-worker asked, "Can I ask you a personal question? That thing you wear on your head." This is the level of conversation. This is the level of depth that regular day to day, when we occupy the same space in a hospital, in a grocery store, in a school, yields. And so at those events, they're not debates. They're not a way for you to show off your faith or to invite someone in your own faith. What we do is we do this. We roll up our sleeves and we share a little bit of ourselves. We share about how one white lady from Pulaski, Tennessee, was concerned about walking in an alley and there was a black man on the other end. And she was afraid. And she didn't know that about herself. She discovered herself. And then another person who is African American said, "Believe me, if I were that man, I'd be more afraid than you were. Because in the end, it's your word against mine. And we know who's going to be establishing the truth." And so as we rolled our sleeves and showed our injuries, our wounds, we became human to one another. And sometimes it was almost a contest. Show me how big your wound is, and I'll show you mine. And that's how we learn about another. We are able to connect on a level that we don't connect on during everyday life. Another lady said, "I'm going up to my husband's office, and on the way up, because I look a certain way, a lady asked me if the cleaning was all done." There's been times when we've cried And there's been times when we've celebrated at those events. And there is nothing to lose when we have conversation like such. There's everything to lose when we don't. And that's when we stay separate communities. We don't relate to one another. I hope that helped share a little bit more about it.
Let's have a round of applause for Rabbi Pezzner leading you around six. Before I offer some closing remarks, I want to invite Imam Osama from the Murfreesboro Mosque to say a couple of words.
Well, Imam Ahmed asked me to speak. You will blame him if it will be long. It always surprised me how people in an interfaith event try to convince each other, raising the importance of talking with each other and listening to one another. I learned a lot from the event when I go to pick up my daughter from the school. Jonah, she is in the 3rd grade. And I watch Jonah with everyone in her classmates. And all of them are fine. They did not need an event to convince them that they can talk with each other. And she is the only Muslim in the class. And she is very proud of herself being Muslim. And she has a Jewish friend. And the rest of the class are Christian. People, when we talk about interfaith, you will find yourself dealing maybe with what could be considered reform from any religion. And a Muslim individual will say, you know what, we have to fight the Islamophobic. I don't really care about the Islamophobic. I am really sure that the Islamophobic in America and elsewhere will go to the same place in the history with the anti-Semitic and the African American. It will go to the garbage. I don't think we're supposed to talk with each other because we are to fight them. But I think because it's the right thing to do. I think regardless of the circumstance, of the country you came from, or the fight you are up against, I think we are to recognize the fundamental principle building this relationship, which is us being really brothers and sisters who came from Adam and Eve. You can be Jewish or Muslim, you can be what you want to be. But please remember that the person you dislike is very much your relative, like it or not. I had a mixed feeling when the Rabbi said it was the first time for him to speak in a mosque. I was happy for you, sad for the circumstance. Why didn't the people of Boston welcome you to the mosque? It's a very wonderful Islamic center in Boston, and you are a wonderful man, and I'm sure when Muslims invite people of other faiths to the Islamic centers, we are not trying to be cool. We are not trying to be so much toward the left. We are very much doing what our Prophet did. Prophet Muhammad in Arabia welcomed Christian and other community to his own mosque. So we are not really liberal, by the way, welcoming everyone to the Islamic center. I want to be clear about that. And I really appreciate Brother Salah and Imam Ahmed and the wonderful work of the brothers and sisters in ICF. And if you want to come to speak in a mosque, anytime you can come to Tennessee, anytime you want. It's very open. And Mark is here, and we mentioned to you that he did not only speak. We spoke in the Islamic Center and in the synagogue, different kind of talk. We raised serious questions because I personally believe that for us to build a strong relationship, we have to be able to raise any question we have in mind. And we have to start speaking with each other instead of speaking about each other. And if you are concerned about any elements in any practice, if you want to understand the concept of the chosen people, ask a Jewish rabbi. If you are troubled by any event from any Muslim individuals, Muslims are people, by the way. They are like the Jewish, the Christians. They are not perfect, They are people. And the people, by definition, people, most of them, fortunately, are reasonable. Otherwise, we cannot really coexist for all of these years. As far as radicalism is not a religious practice. The Prime Minister of Israel himself was killed by a radical Jewish. And I don't think his radical understanding came from his religious practice, but because of the mentality he had. I think a radical Muslim is not radical because of a religious practice, in my opinion. I think we have to try the source of radicalism, which is the political environment, corruption in the countries, the lack of education, very difficult times people are having in raising their kids. I am really grateful for the time. And Imam Ahmed said to me, please speak, and I am not sure for how many hours. He is here to confirm he is someone I really care and love, and I really appreciate the opportunity to learn from every one of you and to be part of this. May God watch over all of us, and may God help us all to be what He desires for us to be. And may God watch over our country, and may God bless this place, may God bless this city and this state. May God bless our wonderful country. Amen.
Thank you very much, Imam Osama. So the family of Abraham views tonight's program as a continuation of what we hope to be a continuing effort to better understand our neighbors in Nashville and the surrounding communities. Our next event will be on February 9th, 2016, when we will present David Brockman, a national expert on curriculum, who will speak on the topic of education of middle school students about religious traditions. That will be at Congregation Micah at 7 p.m. on February 9th. As you may be aware, there has been some controversy on that topic, primarily out of Williamson County. So if you will provide your email address on the forms outside, we'll be happy to notify you about that in future programs. We encourage you, through your faith community and civic organizations to which you belong, to involve yourself in meaningful interreligious cultural engagement. Our religious traditions teach us to welcome the stranger. The United States is a country of immigrants. Whatever your national origin or religion, it is likely that your forebears came to this country as strangers. Most probably, they were not particularly welcome when they arrived and may have indeed been viewed as subversive or dangerous. Our history in this great country teaches us that we can do better than that. Through our freedoms of association, religion, and speech, we have the opportunity to learn about each other. We must seize that opportunity in order to create and maintain a welcoming community that we value and which is ultimately to our mutual benefit. Before you leave tonight, please join us for refreshments outside. We also have an evaluation form that you'd like to complete. And finally, I just want to invite you to a program that will be at the Bellevue branch of the Nashville Public Library on Wednesday, January 27th, put on by the Faith and Cultural Center about the hijab, a community forum on understanding the headscarf from the perspective of Muslim women. Thank you for joining us tonight, and please share conversation in the foyer with refreshments. Thank you.